every comic that Spider-Man has appeared in from 1962 to 1963. Amazing Fantasy 15. Peter Parker is a nerdy orphan who loves his Aunt May and Uncle Ben and science, so he goes to watch a science experiment, and so does a spider. The spider gets zapped, Peter gets bitten, and he suddenly has spider powers. He can climb walls, he can crush pipes, and he can walk down wires. With a costume and some web shooters and the ability to shoot a candle, he becomes famous. So famous that he doesn't have to listen to a guard who wants him to stop some thief running past him, so he lets the thief go. Then, one night after a sold-out show, he comes to find police outside his house. His Uncle Ben interrupted a home burglary and was shot. Angry, Peter chases after the murderer. He scares him, webs him, and punches him unconscious, but in the light of day, he notices his worst nightmare. The murderer was the same thief that he let escape. Our story ends with Peter Parker walking down an alley, pondering on the fact that, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Amazing Spider-Man number 1, Part 1. Peter Parker is still very angry that his Uncle Ben is dead and it's all his fault, and landlords are asking Aunt May for money because landlords are the worst. But it's okay because he's a star and he can make all sorts of money until J. Jonah Jameson comes along. JJJ rallies against Spider-Man, going on tour to tell people that he's a menace.
I say that Spider-Man should be outlawed!
Instead, he wants people to worship real heroes, like his son, John Jameson, who's about to blast off into space. But as his son takes off, the control system goes awry, and there's only one man who can help, Spider-Man. He commandeers a plane, flies up, webs to the out-of-control spacecraft, and refixes the control panel. As the parachute opens, John Jameson is saved, and everybody must love Spider-Man now, except for J. Jonah Jameson, who thinks it's a hoax, and the general public, and the FBI who have a warrant for his arrest, and his own Aunt May. Nobody loves Spider-Man anymore. Amazing Spider-Man 1, Part 2. Peter Parker is poor, but he has an idea. He'll join the Fantastic Four. Swinging across to the Baxter Building, he fights them to prove his worth, only to find out that they don't pay money, so he swings away angry. Meanwhile, across town, a master of disguise steals some documents. According to his own thought bubble, he is the Chameleon, and hearing about the warrant for Spider-Man's arrest, he has the perfect idea. He'll frame Spider-Man. And it works for a short amount of time, but Spider-Man quickly figures out what's going on and chases the Chameleon back to his Russian submarine. Spidey captures him and brings him back to the guards for arrest, but then a smoke bomb goes off and Chameleon has an opportunity to disguise himself as one of the guards. Even though Spidey can use his spider sense to detect him, it just looks like he's beating up a random guard, so he flees, never seeing that a torn piece of clothing gives the Chameleon's game away. Amazing Spider-Man 2, Part 1. A master criminal called Vulture is swooping down from the sky to commit crimes, and J. Jonah Jameson wants pictures. And who better to take those pictures than Peter Parker? So he grabs a camera and he goes off to fight the Vulture, and ends up getting dunked in a water tower. As he recovers and makes some changes to his gear, Vulture warns everybody that he's going to steal a diamond shipment from under their noses. Everyone's eyes are to the skies, expecting an attack from above. But then, out of the sewer, Vulture pops out, grabs the suitcase, and makes his getaway. And he would have got away with it too if it wasn't for that pesky Spider-Man who fights him in the skies above Manhattan and then uses an anti-magnetic device to deactivate Vulture's wings. While he swings to safety, Vulture hits the ground and is arrested by the police. The issue ends with Peter Parker getting paid for the pictures he took, paying off a year's worth of rent for Aunt May, and Vulture languishing in jail and vowing revenge. Amazing Spider-Man 2, Part 2. Peter Parker is so good at science that he gets hired by an electronics expert, Professor Cobwell. Before his first day on the job, he visits the Tinkerer who's repairing a radio for the professor and senses something odd. His suspicions are confirmed when he opens up the radio to find strange devices inside. He decides to visit the Tinkerer at night. Inside, he finds Martians working with the Tinkerer, using his repair jobs to spy on the world. He fights them but is quickly overwhelmed and trapped inside a glass case. However, using his webbing through a very small hole, he manages to free himself. The subsequent fight leads to a fire and the Martians escape, abandoning the Tinkerer. Spider-Man tries to rescue him but with no luck, but he manages to escape. The Martians take off in their spaceship, destroying all the devices that they'd already created. Spider-Man would think that it was just a strange dream, if not for the mask that he pulled off the Tinkerer's face in his rescue attempt. Amazing Spider-Man number 3. Life is too easy for Spider-Man. Everybody's too easy to defeat and he wishes for someone harder. Granting his wish, the universe gives him Dr. Otto Octavius, also known as Dr. Octopus, an atomic scientist. An experiment goes awry and the Doctor finds himself with 4 metal arms attached to himself permanently. Across town, J. Jonah Jameson hears about the injured scientist and wants pictures, so he sends Peter Parker. Swinging to the hospital as Spider-Man, Peter discovers that Dr. Octopus has gone crazy and taken hostages. Spider-Man breaks in, fights Doc Ock and loses, getting thrown out of the window for his troubles. Despite wishing for stronger enemies, Peter Parker gives up. How can he be Spider-Man if he can't defeat this new bad guy? As Spidey retires, Doc Ock takes over an atomic facility. The army locks it down. No one's allowed in or out. Their only hope? The Human Torch. Only problem is, the Human Torch is fresh out of fire powers, so as he recharges he goes to a local school and teaches terrible maths. There he makes a speech to the students, telling them to never give up, and inspires Peter Parker to pick up the Spider-Man mantle once again. As the Amazing Spider-Man, he slingshots his way into the closed-off atomic facility, dodges the attacks that Dr. Octopus sends his way, and finds himself in a chemical lab. In the lab, Spider-Man creates a special chemical weapon so that when he faces Dr. Octopus again, he's able to fuse his metal arms together. They fight once more, but Spider-Man is ready this time and is able to deliver a knockout blow. Meanwhile, Johnny Storm is ready to fight Dr. Octopus, only to find that Spider-Man has already defeated him. Much to his confusion, Spider-Man thanks him for the inspiration and swings off. Our issue ends with none other than Flash Thompson, Peter Parker's school bully, telling him that Spider-Man is what a real hero looks like, never knowing the irony of his statement. Amazing Spider-Man number 4. Everyone thinks Spider-Man is a menace thanks to J. Jonah Jameson. Even criminals threaten to sue, so he pays JJJ a visit and leaves a surprise. On the way home, he sees a man being chased by the police, but when Spidey tries to catch him, the man turns into sand and escapes. Before the fight gets underway, Spidey's mask gets torn and he flees to keep his identity a secret. At home, as he sews up his costume, Peter watches a news program about the man he fought. He's called Flint Marko, and he escaped from prison and hid on a beach where they were doing nuclear tests. And now he can turn his molecules into sand. That's why they call him the Sandman. The next day, J. Jonah Jameson finds himself stuck to a chair thanks to Spidey's web surprise. After changing his trousers, he demands pictures of Spider-Man so he can accuse him of being the same person as Sandman. To get those pictures, Peter Parker has to turn down a date with Liz Allen at school, making terrible excuses and making her mad. As Peter curses his dual identity and his rotten luck, Sandman escapes from the police and breaks into Peter's school. Sandman threatens a professor to give him a diploma before Spider-Man interrupts and they fight in the hallways. Spider-Man is thwarted again and again and again by the fact that Sandman can turn to sand, but in the end Spider-Man lures Sandman down into a basement, tricks him into turning into his sand form, and then uses an industrial hoover to hoover him up. But he forgot to take the photos, so he throws some sand up in the air and takes pictures of himself leaping and punching. It's recreation, not lying, and with the Sandman defeated, Peter can go on his date with Liz Allen, which is exactly what he would do if she wasn't still angry with him and choosing Flash Thompson instead. For a brief moment, Peter gives in to Flash's taunts and gets angry before remembering his powers and what damage he could do to Flash. Instead, he goes home defeated, still a menace to everybody thanks to J. Jonah Jameson, and a coward to everyone at his school. Strange Tales Annual Number 2. Johnny Storm of the Fantastic Four is practicing his flying and lockpicking skills. When he finishes up, he settles down to relax, only to find himself getting angry at all the headlines that are about Spider-Man, that egomaniac. Meanwhile, across town, career thief the Fox steals a Da Vinci painting and leaves some webbing behind to frame the oh-so-famous Spider-Man. Of course, Spidey knows that he didn't do it, but he needs some help finding the person who did, so he swings to Johnny's house for help. But Johnny hates Spider-Man and thinks that he's a criminal, and so the two of them fight in swimming pools and using fire duplicates. Eventually, Spider-Man traps the Human Torch in concrete, which gives him enough time to work on a new web formula designed to tackle the torch's heat. Spidey lures the torch out to a web made of ice webbing that douses Johnny's flame and allows Spider-Man time to explain. He's innocent. After the torch confirms Spidey's innocence, they team up to catch a thief. They travel around the city, uncovering secret hideouts belonging to the Fox, but each time he gives them the slip, sometimes dressed as an old woman. Eventually, some goons tip them off to head to Central Park, where they find the Fox disguised as a stargazer during the day. He tries to escape on rocket boots, but Spidey easily catches up, and the Torch finds the missing Da Vinci inside the fake telescope. These two heroes still hate each other, but they save to the day together. Fantastic Four Annual Number 1. Peter Parker is poor, but he has an idea. He'll join the Fantastic Four. So he swings on over to the Baxter Building and fights them to prove his worth, only to find out that they're a non-profit organization. And wait a second, this feels very familiar, and that's because this is a retelling of the second story from Amazing Spider-Man number 1. The fight is longer, so there are extra beats like the Thing ripping the floor up from the ground, Mr. Fantastic rolling himself into a tube, Invisible Girl shooting Spider-Man with a gun, and the Human Torch using fire rockets. But what's most interesting about this issue is we get to see the exact same panels drawn by two of the greatest artists from comic history, Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby. So let's just take a moment to look at their art and remember their legacy. Amazing Spider-Man number 5. J. Jonah Jameson is on the news hating Spider-Man, and Flash Thompson is watching it and loves Spider-Man. So he doesn't give away his secret identity, Peter Parker pretends to be on the hate side and is dismissed by Flash and his fellow students. Also watching the news from another side of New York is Dr. Doom. He's tired of losing to the Fantastic Four, so he'll team up with the villain Spider-Man to help him defeat them. Of course, Spidey says no, and when he goes to web up the villain, he finds that he's been talking to a life model decoy all along. A fight leads to Spider-Man leaping into the river to get to safety, and by the time he makes it back to the building, it has exploded. Dr. Doom vows that Spider-Man will help him against the Fantastic Four anyway, and the first thing he'll do is discover his secret identity. Elsewhere, someone else is dressed as Spider-Man, Flash Thompson, looking to scare the Spidey-hating Peter Parker. And you guessed it, that's the Spider-Man that Dr. Doom kidnaps. With a Spider-Man in his grasp, Dr. Doom takes over all of the news channels and makes an announcement to the Fantastic Four: disband in an hour or he'll kill Spider-Man. Even though Peter Parker briefly considers leaving Flash to die, he eventually comes to the rescue, although not without cutting power to his own house to convince Aunt May that he has to leave. He sneaks into Dr. Doom's lair through a ventilation shaft, then avoids ice traps and fire traps and spinning balls of death. Spidey has the advantage in the fight until suddenly he's facing two Dr. Dooms, the actual Dr. Doom and the life model decoy from before. Exhausted, Spider-Man trips on one of the balls of death and Dr. Doom is ready to kill him. And that's exactly what he would do if not for the arrival of the Fantastic Four, so instead Dr. Doom flees. And so does Peter when he remembers he's left his aunt in the literal dark. Flash Thompson has a braggadocious tale to tell. But it's not all bad for Peter. Betty Brant, J. Jonah Jameson's secretary, might just have a crush on him. And he might have a crush on her. Amazing Spider-Man number 6. In Florida, a half-man, half-lizard is running rampage. The Daily Bugle challenges Spider-Man to defeat the creature, who they call the Lizard. But J. Jonah Jameson refuses to send Peter Parker. It wasn't a real challenge, he just wanted to sell papers. So instead, Peter visits a museum's dinosaur exhibition to learn more about lizards. While there, he thwarts a robbery turned kidnapping, saving Liz Allen and having her swoon over Spider-Man. But the Lizard is still at large, so it's time for Spider-Man to pay J. Jonah Jameson a visit. After some convincing from Spider-Man, Peter Parker is on his way to Florida to find the Lizard, and maybe visit a local reptile expert, Dr. Kurt Connors. In the swamps of Florida, the Lizard ambushes Spider-Man, nearly drowns him and throws him for almost half a mile. Instead of getting back into a fight he can't win, Spidey visits Dr. Connors' house instead, only to find his weeping wife. It turns out that Doc Connors is the Lizard. He was experimenting to use lizard DNA to regrow his missing arm and transformed himself into a monster. Knowing who the Lizard is, Spider-Man creates an antidote to his condition. He paddles out into the swamps of Florida and finds the Lizard talking to alligators, planning to take over the world. Spidey slips from the wall, revealing himself, and fights the lizard and his alligator army. Eventually he traps the lizard in a tower and is able to hold him still long enough to make him drink the antidote. Just before the lizard can take care of Spider-Man for good, he turns back to Dr. Connors. After reuniting the Connors family, Spider-Man promises to keep Kurt's alter ego a secret, so he gets J. Jonah Jameson to tear up the photos by making him think that they're fake. Back in New York, Peter Parker calls up Liz Allen to ask her on a date, but she angrily hangs up on him. She's waiting on her one true love to call, Spider-Man. Our story ends with the promise of the very first returning Spider-Man villain. Amazing Spider-Man number 7. Thanks to Spider-Man inverting his magnetic wings, Vulture is in prison being the model citizen. But little do they know that he's inventing a new flying device until he escapes by flying over the prison walls. Peter Parker hears of the Vulture's escape and leaves to fight him, enduring mocking from Flash Thompson, who just thinks he's running away scared. But fighting Vulture should be easy, right? He's already defeated him once and he has the device to switch off his wings. And so that's the device he uses when he fights Vulture. And he wins! Vulture falls from the sky, but Spidey doesn't realise that it's a ruse and that these new wings aren't affected by his device, and Vulture flies up and sucker punches him. Spider-Man falls, and the web line that he fires to save himself misses, and he hits the rooftop hard, potentially breaking his arm. A crowd gathers to see his failure, and the Vulture crows. He's the man that defeated Spider-Man. No one can stop him now. With the city as his oyster, Vulture plans his next heist. He's going to steal from J. Jonah Jameson, the payroll from the Daily Bugle. Meanwhile, Peter Parker discovers that his arm is not broken, it's just sprained. But that doesn't stop Flash Thompson making fun of him. But at least he gets to flirt with Betty Brant, telling her the real reason why he hurt his arm, even though she doesn't believe him. Of course, if he's flirting with Betty Brant, then he's at the Daily Bugle, which means he's there when the Vulture attacks and can quickly turn into Spidey to stop him. They fight through the Bugle offices, Spidey almost gets crushed by a printing machine, and eventually Vulture escapes out of a window where he has the advantage. Spider-Man lets the Vulture ambush him and lets him fly them both up into the sky before he webs the Vulture's wings up and they both come plummeting to Earth. Luckily, Spider-Man can create a web parachute and lets the Vulture float down to his arrest. In a trashed Bugle office, a wounded Peter Parker finds Betty Brant again, says that he was hiding in a closet, and promises her romance in her future. Strange Tales 115. With Ben and Sue busy and Reed Richards curing blindness, Johnny Storm is tasked with finding Spider-Man so that he can help defeat Sandman, who's just escaped from prison. But who needs Spider-Man, Johnny says. The Human Torch could take care of Sandman, so that's what he tries. But Sandman only has eyes for Spider-Man and won't consider fighting anybody else. The next day, Spidey himself climbs to the top of a tall building and makes an announcement on the megaphone to Sandman, "Come and get me." But when he does, he finds out that it's not Spider-Man at all. It's Johnny Storm in disguise. The Sandman leads the Human Torch into a building where he tricks him into activating the sprinklers and weakening his fire powers. But those very same sprinklers also turn his body into mud. With the Human Torch torchless and the Sandman sandless, they fight as normal humans, and Johnny uses his training to knock the Sandman out. The real Spider-Man swings in at the end, only to find that everything has already been dealt with. I'm reading every Spider-Man ever, so thanks for joining me on this journey. If you want to continue into 1964, click on the link here. The quality only gets better. And I upload a new recap every Thursday, so subscribe and hit that bell to get notified when that happens.